There's a popular saying that a lie can travel halfway around the world, while the truth is just putting on its shoes. I think many of us in the diaspora can agree that this has been the case concerning African history. In fact, it was the duty of enslavers, Arab and European, to lie about the nature of African people and their history in order to justify slavery. Today, I wanted to address the age-old lie about the acceptance and complacency of Africans during slavery, because the truth is, our ancestors found diverse ways to resist every step of the way. What up, African Road? It's Home Team here, and welcome back to another video of African history, culture, and worldview. By supporting this channel on Patreon, you're helping in the creation of these videos and supporting this content. If you'd like access to full courses and sources, or you simply want to show your support, you may do so by clicking the Patreon link in the description box below. To begin, this video was very difficult for me to make, and so I wanted to give a disclaimer because even though I make videos on our dark ages, this one struck a different chord because of the very detailed information I was able to retrieve. I hope you guys can understand why it's important to speak on this history despite its horrors. I personally believe it's a way to truly remember our more immediate ancestors and give honor to their history. Please keep in mind that because of the nature of this video, there will be a lot of information that's left out just because of the grotesque, immoral weight of it all. So there may be some accounts you are aware of that exemplify the purpose of this video but won't be included. I'm really hoping I was able to find the balance of safeguarding our mental health as Afro-descendant people while also revealing the core of the history. Also, this video will have more than the usual amount of quotes because I really want you to see the words directly from the people in that time. It just holds more weight coming from them directly. So again, after censorship, I don't think anything in this video will be too horrific given the topic, but of course this is based on my own sensibilities. Anyway, I'm hoping this was a good enough disclaimer. Let's begin. The content of this video is taken from the great work of Dr. Ella Forbes at Temple University. She researched and highlighted the many ways in which Africans and their descendants resisted enslavement. She makes a point that many of us aren't accustomed to hearing, that the enslavement of Africans was actually a dangerous endeavor for the enslaver. We know in general that some Africans did indeed resist slavery, but we often don't hear about the paranoia of enslavers or about how dangerous it truly was. Dr. Eller informs us that in spite of their best efforts to guarantee the perpetual servility of Africans, Africans revolted, rebelled, and resisted every step of the way. Even though Europeans promoted lies about the docile nature of Africans, the enslavers who were on the ground actually doing the work clearly did not believe in it. Frances Ann Kemble, an English actress who married an American slaveholder, speaks about the constant rabid fear slaveholders had of enslaved Africans and of insurrections. But before we get into European accounts of African resistance, let's first hear about first-hand accounts from Afro-descendant people. Solomon Northup, a free black man from New York, was kidnapped and forced into slavery in the Deep South. His story is one of the more popular ones, and a movie was made about his life called 12 Years a Slave. He tells us about his own resistance and the resistance of other Africans. He speaks about how he attacked his enslaver and his attempt at escape. He revealed just how normal talk of revolt was among black people. He said that the idea of insurrection is not new among the enslaved population of Louisiana. More than once, I have joined in serious consultation when the subject has been discussed. Interestingly enough, Mr. Northup heard of the narrative about the passive or submissive African, and he made it a point to make a comment about it. They were deceived who flatter themselves that the ignorant and debased slave has no conception of the magnitude of his wrongs. They are deceived who imagine that he rises from his knees with back lacerated and bleeding, cherishing only a spirit of meekness and forgiveness. A day may come, it will come, a terrible day of vengeance, when the master in his turn will cry in vain for mercy. I do think it's safe to take Mr. Northup's word as gold. He could no doubt feel the energy around him and knew the general temperature of enslaved black people in America. His testimony is a far cry away from the accommodating African trope. From his account, it would seem as though opportunity was the only deterrent. Another very telling incident speaks about resistance to whippings. I think we may have a rather clear image in our heads about how enslaved black people submitted to punishment, and the idea of resisting in that very moment was either a death sentence or some other doom. Well, even though it did not happen often, there are certainly accounts in which it did. One of the most popular first-hand accounts was by a woman named Harriet Jacobs, who told us about her 12-year-old brother William. Master Nicholas said he should be flogged, and he would do it, whereupon he went to work. But William fought bravely, and the young master, finding he was getting the better of him, undertook to tie his hands behind him. He failed in that likewise. But dint of kicking and fisting, William came out of the skirmish none the worse for a few scratches. Now, these are just small accounts about the resistance of black people in America, but I think they're important when revealing the story in its full scope. For example, other small ways in which black Americans resisted was through work slowdowns and destruction of property. One of the most powerful quotes I've ever heard from an enslaved person has come from Harriet Jacobs. She speaks about a form of resistance that cannot really be seen, the resistance of the spirit. Here's what she has to say. Though one of God's most powerless creatures, I resolved never to be conquered. I think this quote is so powerful because in a philosophical sense, it literally illuminates the difference between a slave and an enslaved person. I think Harriet Jacobs' words should be a sort of poetic staple in the collective recollection of our dark ages. One scholar named Robert Starobin reviewed a collection of letters from enslaved Africans, and he concluded that many enslaved people shared a similar resistance to Harriet Jacobs. The various forms of slave resistance suggest that American blacks managed to retain their humanity under dehumanizing conditions and to confront their masters with an array of ingenious protests. Slaves created a way of life opposed to that which masters desired and perpetuated a tradition of vigorous opposition to oppression. Now let's speak about resistance over on African shores. Nicholas Owen, a slaver himself, wrote a book called Journal of a Slave Dealer, in which he spoke about the resistance of enslaved Africans on the ship itself from 1746 to 1757. Fighting a French ship who was taken by the slaves, all the people killed save the captain and doctor who was ashore, but without success, for the slaves behaved so as to make us give over the attempt, with loss on our side. Concerning the extreme danger and paranoia of the enslavers on slave ships, John Newton speaks very clearly about it. His first-hand account debunks in full the propaganda of the docile and/or accommodating African. This is what he has to say. The risk of insurrections is to be added to the other disasters which may befall a ship. These are always meditated, for the men slaves are not easily reconciled to their confinement and treatment, and if attempted, they are seldom suppressed without considerable loss, and sometimes they succeed, to the destruction of a whole ship's company at once. One unguarded hour or minute is sufficient to give the slaves the opportunity they are always waiting for. As we can see, John Newton and others were well aware of African resistance, and no fool would give up 1 minute or hour of surveillance to discourage revolt. Other ways in which Africans would resist on the ship has actually been highlighted in some movies, so I won't go much into that. It involves fits of passion in which some of our ancestors chose to return to the earth through the sea rather than experience the moral depravity of a foreign land. One European narrative really stuck out to me. It's about one slaver's experience with a Fulani girl that he was trying to get into the ship. Theodore Cannot was a slave trader for 20 years and recounted the individual and collective resistance of Africans throughout the Atlantic slave trade. Apparently, this moment stuck out to him about this Fulani girl. The girl resisted with all her energy. She refused to walk. She swore never to see the ocean and threatened to dash her skull against the first rock in her path. Her righteous protest and determination actually worked because she was later given to a Fulani man and not taken on the ship. I really cannot imagine how horrific the scene must have been that not even the ignorance of youth could deny what was going on. The courage of this girl is certainly something to be remembered, honored, and retold. The persistent view, especially in the early 1900s, of the meek and passive African was simply untenable. The major uprisings such as Gabriel Prosser, Nat Turner, and Denmark Vesey's attempt created real problems in the consciousness of white America. How the concept of the patient, docile Negro ever came into being is a minor marvel of historical delusion. It was created against tremendous odds of fact and circumstance. Perhaps it was a psychological necessity of the sort that sometimes prompts people to blind themselves to wish-destroying fact, a sort of sublimation of guilt or fear, or both. I think it's interesting that this idea of the docile Negro, so ingrained in American consciousness, could not even be fully undone amongst white opponents of slavery. In a minor way of affirming that idea, white abolitionists attempted to hijack black agency of the Underground Railroad. Some records concerning the Underground Railroad contain a serious distortion, which has been an overemphasis on the amount of assistance rendered by white abolitionists, who wrote a great deal on the subject. This tended to make the people whom the railroad was designed to aid, the fugitive slaves, seem either invisible or passive and helpless without aid from others. Unfortunately, the hijacking of black agency, or blackness in general, is a long American tradition. Anyway, the truth is, to paint all Africans and their descendants with one brush would be a failure. The majority of Africans who found themselves enslaved had little inclination to revolt, but there were some who did with varying levels of diversity, success, and failure. We focused mostly on enslaved Africans in America, but revolts, resistance, and rebellion occurred more frequently outside of America, like in the Caribbean and South America, most of them consisting of escapes, sabotage, and refusal to work. America did not receive the amount of Africans as did other places, and it's no surprise that more maroon communities existed outside of the states. And of course, we can't forget the epitome of resistance from African men and women in the Haitian Revolution, the only successful revolution of enslaved Africans that went on to form a state. Well, I'm all out, guys. If you like these videos and want to help in its continued production, consider supporting the home team on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.